G'day, mate. Luke Ford here with some alt-right Torah on Tisha B'Av. So it's a Jewish fast day, and Tisha B'Av commemorates all sorts of tragedies in Jewish life, such as the destruction of the two temples and other things such as the expulsion from Spain, all purported to have occurred on this date. So it is the 9th of Av in the Jewish calendar. It's an annual fast day in Judaism. And both the destruction of Solomon's temple by the Babylonian Empire and the Second Temple by the Roman Empire in Jerusalem occurred on this day. Tisha B'Av is regarded as the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, and it's believed to be a day which is destined for tragedy. The observance of the day includes 5 prohibitions, including a 25-hour fast from food and water. There's the reading of the Book of Lamentations in synagogue, which mourns the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, followed by the recitation of Kinot, which are liturgical dirges that lament the loss of the temples and of Jerusalem. And the days become associated with the remembrances of other major calamities which have befallen the Jewish people, such as the murder of the 10 martyrs by the Romans, massacres in numerous medieval Jewish communities during the Crusades, and even the Holocaust. And I sent out a bunch of invites, but absolutely nobody is showing up. So I'm going to do this show solo and see if anyone shows up. And at the same time, I'm keeping an eye on the US Open. So Tiger Woods was in the lead. He did seem to be on track for his first major championship in 10 years. And now he's just fallen off the pace by about 1 shot. If anyone wants to join the show, as none of the people I invited have shown up, then send me an email at lukeisback@gmail.com. So what do you want to know about Tisha B'Av? It's a fast day. I'll send Claire an invite. Good on you, Claire. So Claire, I am going to send this to you via Facebook. And the Torah portion for this week is Vayetchanan, which is the second Torah portion in the book of Deuteronomy, which is the 5th and final book of the Torah, or of the Pentateuch. And the book of Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell address to the people of Israel. And it reads like one long speech by Moshe. So a lot of good stuff in this week's Torah portion. A lot of good stuff in the observance of Tisha B'Av and its meaning. So as I was studying this week's Torah portion, which is Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 23 to chapter 7, verse 11, I keep seeing many similarities between the Jews of the Torah and the Jews of today. There's a particular biting type of Jewish humor, which one sees in the Torah, and one also sees in so many Jews of today. It's we would have been better if you just left us in. He just left us in Egypt, where at least we had leeks. Okay, at least we had leeks in Egypt. And then the Israelites are complaining to Moses, "You dragged us out in the desert, and there's no food to eat. We don't have any meat. We don't have any water." It's constant complaining. And Jews tend to be a little more emotional than a lot of other peoples. So when you feel free to give vent to your emotions, that's going to include some negative emotions as well. Jews tend to be more openly demonstrative, more passionate people, more wearing their heart on their sleeves people than white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and people of Northern European heritage. So in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 24, Moses is not at all stiff upper lip in his expressions. He's no white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And this Torah portion begins with him imploring God, and in turn, God shows some rather non-Anglo emotions. So Moses says, "At that time I pleaded with God, Sovereign Lord, you have begun to show your servant your greatness and your strong hand. What God is there in heaven or on earth that can do the deeds and mighty works you do? Let me go over and see the good land beyond the Jordan, that fine hill country in Lebanon. But because of you, the Israelites, the Lord was angry with me, would not listen to me. That is enough," the Lord said. "Do not speak to me anymore about this matter." So not exactly a collection of Anglo emotions. Dennis Dale, welcome to the show. Go ahead and unmute and join in.
Good morning.
Hey, how's it going, Dennis?
Do I sound weird? I sound weird in my headphones.
You sound fine.
Oh, thanks. Great Torah portion.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the first. There's even a literary tradition, and I think prophets that come after have all emulated Moses' great "I can't go with you" scene, right?
Yeah.
I can't cross the river with you. It remains to this day. Even in stories we tell, there's always, I can't go on. I've done my part. It's a brilliant moment, and yeah, I think you're right. But the lack of a stiff upper lip. You had someone on your show recently talking about the problem of an angry God or whatever, right? This Hebrew God.
Yeah.
But I think he didn't understand it. The real problem is why would a perfect being even concern himself at all with us, right?
Right.
But it's just our imperfect way of understanding what's going on. Yeah, but I realize the Old Testament has almost no relationship to the Christian idea of it left, when God says that. I was struck by that great moment when he says, "Talk to me no more about it. Conversation over, dude." He's like a boss. He's like, he's an emotional God. And I don't see how that translates into a universal God, though, right? It has to be the God of a people. Can't be, my kick is that universal religion is ultimately a disaster for humanity.
Yeah, it's interesting that the God is very much kind of in the image of the Jew, in that Jews tend to be very open and expressive in their emotions and vent and get angry and passionate, and it's far from the reserve of the Northern European.
He's a great projection of the people and their personality. Yeah, I mean, not only was he made in the image of man, he was made in the image of Hebrew man of the time. Yeah.
And the Hebrew man of the time seems so similar to the Hebrew man of today, doesn't he?
Doesn't he? But yeah, I mean, I want to avoid making these sort of assumptions, right? Because these just so sort of explanations you get in your head. Yeah, it's remarkable. I think there is something to it. I want to resist it, though, because you're going back so far that this personality is preserved over 4,000 years or so. Could be. It seems it is, and it seems a success. All right, the Torah. What's the Torah? It's a survival strategy for a people. That's what I see when I read this. It's the constitution of a people. An ethnicity over time. And it's worked. It's worked great. I think.
I remember when I was a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, when I'd read the Torah, which we didn't call the Torah, we called it the Pentateuch. It seemed very remote. These people didn't seem like people I knew. But then when I converted to Judaism, the Torah became much more intimate, because the people described in the Torah were people that I very quickly got to know.
That's interesting. Yeah. I know as a kid reading the Old Testament, I wasn't ready for it. So the language and everything was very remote. I didn't understand the motivations and the stories, what was going on. I understand them a lot better now that I'm an adult, and maybe that I've been. I don't know Jews, and I know the image of Jews I get in the media, really, and of course that comports a lot with stereotypes, unfortunately.
And Claire writes in the chat room, Claire, I sent you an invite via Facebook if you want to join. The Abrahamic God needed a pilot project, a pilot scheme to represent him before he could spread his laws to the Gentiles. So that is a common interpretation of Jews as the pilot project for humanity. Because if you take divine revelation seriously, whether or not you believe in it literally, you see that God starts out giving his will to Adam and Eve. He gives them direction, just don't eat of the tree, and they defy him. So then he comes back, he has to destroy the whole world in the flood because humanity is not following his directions. So then he comes back with a special relationship with Abraham, and okay, I'm going to embody my will with a particular people. And then from a Christian perspective, that doesn't work. So God embodies his will by presenting this perfect divine human being who comes to earth and dies on a cross. And then from a Muslim perspective, that doesn't work. So there's the next revelation of God to Muhammad. And so wherever you end off in your faith statement, wherever it is, it's after a whole series of God's projects to try to keep humanity in line.
Yeah, well, the Jews have loosed this on the world, whether they intended to or not, this idea, and I don't think it's going to end. With the Muslims, right? Thomas Friedman. I hate to use Thomas Friedman, but, you know, his Islam is religion 3.0 as they see it. That's pretty good. Yeah, they see it as the final word, you know, but I don't think so, right? No one's ever going to be satisfied. Something more is coming. But what I'm wondering is, how is God going to destroy us now, right? What's our flood going to be now? Because I think we've definitely lost our way.
From a Jewish perspective, explicit divine revelation ended with the prophet Amos. So it ended about 200 years before the Common Era. And the Jewish understanding is that God said everything that he needed to say, essentially in the Bible, and now it's just up to live it. From a Christian perspective, of course, there's a new revelation, and from a Seventh-day Adventist perspective, there's a new revelation with Ellen G. White, who was the female founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. From the Mormon perspective, it's the divine revelation of the Book of Mormon. So, you know, whether or not you accept new revelations, of course, is a matter of faith.
Don't the Catholics, though, as well say it's all done? Christian revelation is the last revelation. Like the Jews, they say there will be no more. Of course they will say that.
I believe so. Claire, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. This is a question to Dennis, saying we need more than Islam. But what is it that you need that is more than Islam, Dennis?
Well, Islam is not much but a book of rules. We need, Western Europeans, for instance, we need a goal as a people we need to achieve. One of the things we did recently was we went to the moon, and it's kind of an absurd idea to put a man on the moon. We did it just to show we could do it. We need that. Islam does not make for that. Islam will destroy that because it's concerned with the rules. It's concerned with moral behavior. Yeah, it's concerned with moral, personal behavior on the ground.
But there's nothing in Islam that says you can't go to the moon. It's
but for some reason
consciously imperialistic anyway.
But they just Muslims just won't seek out, and it's against. And you see how it runs so much against. We were just talking about revelation, and Muslims can't have further revelation, not just religious revelation, but further scientific revelation that's going to trouble even more, you know, our old religious ideas about God.
I don't think it says that. I mean, I don't think the Quran says that.
I just look at the way it's practiced.
Okay, but you know, obviously these Muslims that you see who you regard as backward are, well, I mean, the whole point is that God has said he's going to punish Jews, he's going to punish Muslims, he's going to punish everybody who doesn't obey his rules. And in the Quran, he also says, don't forbid what I have allowed and don't allow what I have forbidden. He warns in the Quran against this specifically, probably because God, if he exists, knows our tendency to distort instructions that we, find inconvenient. And we also know that the Americans distort and ignore and flout their constitution, and they can't help it. They'll say it's expedient, it's politic, we got to do it. Times have changed, and all that kind of thing. But I actually can't see anything in the Quran that says, oh, you can't innovate, you mustn't go to the moon. Right. It does say seek knowledge, and in the Hadith, Muhammad is said to tell his followers to seek knowledge, even if it means going to China. So there never was this kind of backward idea about Islam, and I think you must give it credit for having expanded its empire very quickly and suddenly when it did. Yeah. But obviously it ran out of steam and got taken over by the Europeans, whom I believe, because they were fighting with each other so
Islam was taken over by Europeans?
Well, the Middle East, Turkey, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It all happened in the 19th century, and just as there's a Jewish question now, there was something in history called the Eastern Question, and it was to do with the fall, the decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire, and what to do about it vis-a-vis Russia, who. That was what the Crimean War was about. Right. It was about Britain trying to prevent the Russians from acquiring a warm water port, and somehow the Turks were involved in it. I forget now, because it's a very complicated imperialistic war that, but the whole point is that if you don't think Islam is enough, then you should be. I suspect that.
Yeah, Claire, I'm just muting you for a second to try to get a word in edgewise. So I've got a question for you, Claire, and then you can go ahead and unmute and answer me. I just don't see anything to admire in Islam in the last 600 years. Like, what exactly in Islam over the past 600 years is superior? I just don't see in any way, in any direction, how Islam has produced any societies that are superior to what Northern Europeans have produced. I don't see any sustained collection in a country of high IQ Muslims. Islam is overwhelmingly a low IQ religion. Like, why on earth would we want to imitate a backward, savage, primitive, low IQ religion that has never come close to producing the first world glory of Western civilization? I just don't see any impressive Islamic civilization in the last 500 or 600 years that is superior to what Europeans have produced. So, Claire, go ahead, unmute, and tell me about these superior Islamic civilizations that have outdone what Europeans have produced. I just don't see it. You'll need to unmute yourself, Claire. Okay, until you figure out how to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. So what I'm trying to say really is that there's a world of difference between looking at the brown people you don't like and the book that you will never read. And the reason why these people that you don't like, who are invading the West as you perceive it, is simply because they haven't been following their own religion in the same way that Christians don't follow their own religion, which kind of suggests that you do need to follow at least the very basics of your religion in order to protect yourself against your internal and external enemies. And the very least of it, in my view, is to have legitimate children and properly parent them. And even just one generation of not doing it properly means you let in all kinds of toxic ideas like feminism, transgenderism, gay marriage, and all those things that obviously opportunistically enter your body politic, and now you can't get rid of it, or it's very difficult to do so. So as far as Islam is concerned,
Where are Islamic civilizations in the past 600 years that are superior to what Europeans have produced? I just don't see it. I just don't even see any country with a collection of high IQ Muslims. There isn't even a high IQ Muslim civilization. I mean,
no, but they've declined. They've come and gone. So really, if you're thinking of it in terms of a race, obviously the West is in front and Islam is behind, but we have to ask ourselves why they fell behind. And
because they marry their cousins and they create low IQ, primitive, barbaric civilizations, and they're
the biggest one is the Ottoman Empire, and so we have to find out why the Ottoman Empire declined. I think because it's the biggest representation of an Islamic empire, and they apparently closed the gate of interpretation, so they ossified the interpretation of the Quran. And basically didn't allow any innovations, but that was, a decision made purely by the Ottoman Empire and not contained within the Quran itself. So when you deliberately, distort clear instructions, I suppose you should expect to suffer. I mean, an equivalent example comes in, in the West now. I mean, we're supposed to have free speech. But everywhere, the government and politicians say we don't have free speech. We can't say this. It's hate speech. You go to jail, and nobody seems to be able to fight against it. We have so many lawyers, and they don't even think.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to come back to you. I just want to move on. Dennis, I fail to see anything in the last 500 years of Islam that I want to admire, except their willingness to do whatever it takes to make their group triumphant. So I admire that. Aside from that, I don't see any Islamic civilization that I want to admire.
I don't want to trash them, but yeah, it's ridiculous. Claire's talking about the Ottomans. Yeah, well, their greatness was what? It was the 11th, 12th through the 13th centuries. They inherited a great civilization, maintained it through 3 or 4 centuries, and then it started falling apart, right? Eventually they get the Ottomans. And the Ottomans, basically a secular empire, adopts it, and that becomes sclerotic and can't even survive, right? By the end of World War I, it's done. Why would we trade down, Claire? Why would we trade down? And she keeps telling us, well, these Muslims that are coming in, they're not real Muslims.
No, I don't say they're not real Muslims. And I'm not saying you're trading down. I'm saying that all the rules that you find in the Bible, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you have a clearer version of it in the Quran.
Yeah, how is the Quran compilation of laws? How is it in any way clearer or more valuable than what we have elsewhere in the Bible?
Well, the Quran guarantees religious freedom. It guarantees freedom of worship in chapter 2, verse 256. This is not something that Muslims tend to emphasize because they don't believe in it themselves. But there it is. It's in the book. And the other thing that it does that I find useful is that it does give us. It could give us the constitutional right not to be taxed more than a flat rate income tax of 20%. I think that is very valuable indeed if you want to stop the state from getting overweening and becoming a nanny state. And the other thing is that it quite clearly wants to shame sluts with chapter 24, verse 2, which is the 100 lashes for extramarital sex. So it's very clear about that. It doesn't shilly-shally around about, what to do, like the New Testament, which says, oh, you go to hell. And people might say, okay, I'll take my chances. I don't believe in God, so I'm going to fornicate like hell. But it's not clear in the New Testament, but it's very clear in the Quran. It's also very clear in the Old Testament, but stoning to death people is probably a bit drastic if you want to follow the Old Testament.
So ultimately you're saying it's just that we don't have clear enough rules, and that's why we should adopt Quran.
Yeah, but if you have clear rules, you're more likely to follow it than if you have ambiguous rules. So, a group of people will say, "Oh, it doesn't mean that." No,
But
we
you
don't
pay a
have
price
to.
if you're going to mold people into a rigid set of rules. There's a cost there, right? We've gotten away with a liberal set of rules a long time because we didn't let in people, low IQ third worlders, in to take advantage of it. And we had a bunch of these soft, intelligent, nice white people observing their liberal society. Things can go pretty well. They can go bad. There's degeneracy and stuff. But it's nothing as compared to as when you start letting in people who are kind of relatively savage, like you see the Muslim grape kings in Europe. And you're telling me they're not real Muslims because they don't really read the Quran.
I don't.
So there
I
are
don't
people
say,
actually really trying to define these rules, as you say, right? The Muslim scholars. And that's ground zero of civilizational destruction, as I see it. That's where they're there. They no to everything. You can't have an imagination. You can't have that personal ambition. You can't advance. You can't have curiosity about the natural world. Everything dies in Islam because it has to be forced into these rigid rules that you talk about. Sorry to go on.
but these rules are not well. If they want to follow these ossified rules, fine. But I'm saying we don't have to. We don't have to accept their ossified interpretation. We can interpret it in the way that we see fit, because they don't have a copyright on it. So always I get accused of almost saying, oh, trust these brown Muslims, bring them into your country, let them interpret the Quran for you. And that's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying read it, interpret it yourself in a way that suits you, and just acknowledge that, certain things have to be done, and you're more likely to follow these rules if they're clearly stated. And
Sorry, Claire, I'm just muting you. I don't want to get off on the Quran and Islam. We did 20 minutes on it. Dennis, if you have something that you want to add on the Quran and Islam, mute. Otherwise, I want to get back to the weekly Torah portion. And Claire, you're free to unmute at any time and participate. I just don't want this show derailed any further on Islam. So I'm going to steer it in a new direction. And it's interesting, chapter 3 of Deuteronomy, Moses keeps telling the Jews, but because of you, the Lord was angry with me and would not listen to me. That is enough, the Lord said. Do not speak to me any more about this matter. So throughout the book, Moses would rather blame the Jews for his not getting into the promised land rather than introspecting, rather than saying, hey, maybe I had something to do with it. Or even like a real leader would say, yeah, it's my own fault that I'm not getting into the promised land because I defied God in these ways. I let God down in these ways. I let you down in these ways. You don't hear Moses talking about the ways he let down the Jews. You don't hear Moses talking about the ways he let down God. You just hear a very angry Moses blaming the Jews for his own problems. Not exactly the stuff of great leadership, Dennis.
Yeah, these are the stories too that lend veracity to. You realize you're reading a real history. In the book, these things happened in some form or other. It's too worldly. I don't know. I mean, I guess it speaks to Jewish genius that you make this work, this huge book full of these very human stories, and there aren't a lot of outright heroes. Even Moses not being able to speak, right? Aaron has to speak for him. It's crazy. I grew up on Ten Commandments, and my image of Moses was that, as a kid. And then when you read this, you're astounded by just how human he was.
And there's a saying, there's no fool like an old fool. But I notice, I don't know if you notice this, Dennis, but I notice that my brain now hates change. Like change is really hard for me. When I was 5 years old, I loved change. When I was 15, I loved change. At 25, 35, I was fine with change. At 52, my brain just hates change. It provokes anxiety. It provokes rage. It provokes despair. Like I have all these strongly negative reactions much of the time to any change, and having to grow and to learn stuff that is not in my in my bailiwick is like tremendously challenging for me. I don't know. Do you notice that your brain has come to hate change?
Yeah, no, I'm resisting it now, right? And aware of it. You see it coming on, and you see yourself growing old, and you can see you're going to get to that point eventually where you want zero change. You're just habit. I've always been a guy who slid too easily into habit anyway, so I'm trying to resist. Yeah. But it's hard because we're not supposed to live this way, I guess. We're supposed to, at this point in our lives, not have to be adapting new things. We're supposed to be like wise and old elders in our little groups who know everything. I don't know that.
Sorry, it's a question. Can I ask my question?
Of course.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Is it true that men lose testosterone as they get older in the same way that women lose estrogen as they get older?
Yes,
I'm not sure.
Of course.
Okay, and so that would affect your mood changes as well. It's not a kind of personality change that comes, out of nowhere. The hormonal changes also affect people's mood as well. Would you say?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm much less aggressive. I'm less angry. I'm less horny. I'm less ambitious. I'm less flying off the handle. I mean, all the things that like high testosterone tends to make you angry, tends to make you highly sexual. It tends to make you aggressive. It tends to lead to confrontations. I've definitely noticed all of that diminishing.
But that's good, isn't it?
Yes,
I mean, to not be so aggressive and sexual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have my testosterone level at a lower, and I'm so thrilled that I have testosterone supplements in my top drawer, so I can take them whenever I want. But I just don't like the side effects. The side effects are I'm more prone to anger. I'm more prone to feeling horny. I'm more prone to flying off the handle. I'm more prone to being aggressive, and frankly, I can do without all those inclinations.
But all the sexual stuff, surely it clouds your judgment as well. So it must be a great relief to be free of it as well.
Yeah, it's not, for me, it's not so much a matter of free. It's just that the intensity is turned down a few notches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my basic tendency is to give up everything for sex with an attractive young woman. I mean, I think even Dennis Dale in his advanced years is still prone to those tendencies.
Yeah, you don't even care if your body isn't pushing so hard for it, that there's something else going on, that you still want it. Yeah, that's why guys are out there eating blue pills and stuff. I welcome the changes. Yeah, I mean, I've got clarity in my head that I wish I'd had when I was younger and stronger. I mean, maybe these successful people, they mature quicker, and while they still have the energy, they have both also the self-control to really succeed. But I feel like, it's I'm glad to be done with youthful sort of craziness.
You can see the difference in Andrew Sullivan because he takes testosterone supplements, and when his testosterone is soaring, he's much more prone to flying off the handle and being incredibly angry and making all sorts of pronouncements that he later comes to regret. And then when his testosterone starts dropping back to a normal state for a man of his age, then he's much more calm. But overall, Andrew Sullivan, as a gay man, is incredibly excitable. He leaps onto positions as readily as he leaps onto lovers, and then alights from positions as readily as he alights from lovers. And I think much of that excitability and hopping on and off different causes is shaped by the intensity of his testosterone levels.
He milks the subject matter. No, I'm not going there. We all know the famous quote from his Tinder or whatever. Yeah. I remember he wrote something. Sailor quoted it a long time ago about the blessings of it, how it gave him all this energy. I remember being tempted. Yeah, maybe I should try that. Just get a dose. I just can't bring myself to take anything really. So it just seems
I've
like
actually used testosterone supplements on and off since my early 20s. I had some low testosterone results when I first came down with chronic fatigue syndrome, and so I thought that low testosterone levels may be partly responsible for my exhaustion. And so at various times I've experimented with testosterone supplements from direct injections, which I did on and off for years. And they do something like I would gain about 20 pounds, much of it muscle. It would change the shape of my head. You can see this most dramatically looking at pictures of Barry Bonds, like before and after he started taking testosterone and other supplements. Like the shape of his head would change, his body dramatically changed. He used to be skinny, then he turned into a bodybuilder type. The other thing I noticed, you're much more liable to pull muscles when you're taking testosterone. So there were benefits. Like I felt an increase in aggression and drive and assertiveness, but I found that the downsides of these supplements were not worth the upsides.
Interesting. I'd like to take some just for a weekend. Can I do that?
Sure, but the results will last a little longer than that. But yeah, you could take a testosterone supplement. You will feel a boost. Like within a few hours, you will feel a boost. You'll be much more likely to have nocturnal emissions. You'll feel yourself more likely to get angry, and you'll feel more aggressive and more assertive and more ambitious. And then after a week or two, it will start to drop down again to normal. Also, the shape of your body will change from taking testosterone. You become more muscular. The shape of your head will become.
I wonder who's eating it out there. Bet there are a lot of guys out there doing it.
Yeah, because you get more muscular definition.
I'm seeing more older guys out there buffed up now.
Yeah, look at Jeff Bezos. Look at the difference of pictures of Jeff Bezos today compared to 30 years ago. Like today, he is chiseled. 30 years ago, he looked like a whip.
He's got guns, yeah. Yeah, so you see a lot of that out there. But sorry.
No, go ahead and make your point.
I think I have seen a few with odd-shaped heads, too. That makes me wonder.
Yeah, it definitely affects the shape of your head. It makes it larger and it kind of gets swollen. So people can kind of tell at a glance if they know you, and they're at all knowledgeable in these things, whether or not you're taking supplements. But I've been watching this terrific Netflix show called Last Chance U. It's about some godforsaken community college in Kansas. It takes all these first Division I football players who got kicked out of their Division I schools for various infractions. So here's a guy trying to teach these rebellious kids, giving them one last chance to turn it around. So a bunch of highly destructive, overwhelmingly black athletes pile into this small Kansas town and to play football. And I love American football. And so God, in the wake of watching this series, and I'm reading this Torah portion, God reminds me very much of a football coach, because football coaches in of a certain stripe will listen, but overall they are alpha males. I remember once asking the coach of the San Francisco 49ers, Bill Walsh, if the pressure was getting to him after he started the season 2-2, and he says, well, I'd be happy to match our record over the past 4 years with anybody, because of course he'd won 2 Super Bowls in that stretch of time. And so when I hear God saying to Moses, do not continue to speak to me further about this matter, I'm sure it's a very common phrase said by NFL coaches, except perhaps in a more direct and more profane way. But NFL coaches or bosses, everyone's had a boss, and most bosses some of the time are open to feedback, but almost all bosses will have told you at some point, just do it. Okay? Just do it. No more questions. Just do what I said. And God's very much the boss in this Torah portion. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1, God says, "Now Israel, hear the decrees that I'm about to teach you. Follow them so that you may live and go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving to you." So the whole purpose of Jewish law is to live, not to die, for the people to perpetuate itself, not that it should disappear, and to possess and maintain possession of a particular plot of land. Like, that's the purpose for a constitution, for a set of laws. And the United States Constitution, for example, is not an end in itself. It's not meant to be a death warrant. The purpose of the US Constitution is to help Americans and America live and not die, to retain its sovereignty and not to be overtaken by foreign peoples. And if a crisis requires amending or suspending parts of the Constitution to live, you do that. So the law, both in the Torah and the law as far as the United States Constitution, not an end in itself. The whole purpose of the law is to help you live and not die, for your people to perpetuate itself, and for people to take possession of a land, defend it, and to repel invaders.
Well, we had our own constitution, didn't we? And it assumed that Christendom would protect it and allow us to maintain it. We needed a religious tradition, I think, in this country, the United States, to start out with. I mean, our Constitution has just been about the principles, right? Not about the people or even the land anymore.
Yeah, that's like the modern discussion, that the principles of the Constitution. But the whole point of a constitution is to protect a particular people in a particular land. It's not esoteric discussions about the philosophy and principles of the Constitution. That's not the end.
To protect us and our posterity, ours said, but we don't have anything else. We had something outside of that, Christendom, basically, the Protestant faith that these men brought with them, that they assumed would remain and protect our mostly secular constitution. I wish we had our own, Talmudic tradition, to be honest.
So, breaking news, Tiger Woods has birdied the 14th. He is back to 5 under par. He is just 2 shots out of the lead. He's on the 14th hole. So, Dennis Dow, wouldn't it be something if Tiger Woods wins his first major golf tournament in 10 years? I'm sure you are all a twitter and a flutter.
I am, yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I'll root for him just for no other reason. That I don't have anything against him, But yeah, are you into golf? I don't know anything about it.
Mildly, moderately. I mean, I once talked a friend into watching, I think it was the US Open at Pebble Beach, the final round. And my friend could not imagine watching golf for 3 hours, but it was the most thrilling final round. Like, Jack Nicklaus was just birdieing hole after hole after hole. He was like shooting up to take the lead. And then on the 17th hole, Tom Watson, who was the leader, landed in a bunker. And he chipped out of the bunker, and the green was like sloping very dramatically down and past the cup. So there was like no way he was going to get out of this mess in less than 3 shots. But he chipped out of the bunker onto the green and rolled into the cup. It was thrilling 3 hours of golf. So yeah, generally speaking, I don't watch golf, but I am open to the drama of the human condition. I'm open to the drama of Tiger Woods' story. I mean, this is a man who dominated golf and then has just gone into complete meltdown over the past 10 years. That he would come back and win a major tournament, yeah, I would find that exciting.
Yeah, I mean, when he went down, I'm sure a lot of people very gleefully enjoyed it. Some of them would be the same people that might have praised him for it. I just seeing a guy do that, I think, yeah, I'll root for him. And just if it pisses off, a bunch of people out there who kind of like to see his fall, the Schadenfreude. There should be a word for Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude, Schadenfreude. Yeah. But I could get that, man. Golf, it's an amazing game. I mean, when you get that tiny ball and you got to put it in the hole, right? 300 yards over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. That's and I get why like ex-athletes are really into it, because it's such a skill, and the intense pressure. There might be no greater pressure on an athlete than that guy who's got to make that hard putt or something, you know, with everything on the line. I can't think of a single moment in sports that's probably more hard. I think, you know, probably easier to choke in that moment than anywhere else, you know.
I remember I had I used to play golf with a friend. We were both about 17, and he started off the day with a birdie, and I don't think either of us had ever gotten a birdie before or since. We weren't great golfers. It was a par 4. He hit his second shot over this massive tree, landed it on the green for about 10 feet from the cup, and then sunk the putt for a birdie. And so he was leading all the way, and I was slowly chipping away at his lead. And then we came down to the final hole. He had an 8-foot putt, and he had 2 putts. If he got it in 2 putts, he would win. And so I think he sent his first putt about 3 feet past the hole. So now he had to sink a 3-foot putt to beat me, and he just completely collapsed with these very short putts. And it's emblazoned in my memory, of course. I don't remember the times that I may have choked, but I clearly remember the time that my best friend choked. Have you played golf, Dennis?
Not at all. No, I should take it up. I would like to try it, but I'd probably be awful at it. You know, I'm no good at those precision, you know, like throwing a ball with accuracy. Nah, I can't see that, you know, probably be awful. It takes a lot of discipline. Have you played a lot, or?
I fell in love with it in the summer of 8th grade for some reason before I ever played it. And I remember we were in Puerto Rico for a couple of weeks. My dad was preaching. I think it was the summer between 8th and 9th grade. And I think it was the first time that I got to walk around a golf course. And I just had a tennis ball. It was at night, and I'd just like roll the tennis ball along the green into the cup. And eventually I bought some clubs, and I got some good advice. Some guy told me just take a 3-iron, a 9-iron, and a putter, and just learn those 3 clubs. And so I started doing that. Yeah, I played golf a lot in high school, and almost never since then.
Frisbee golf is a thing here now. I've played it. It's actually kind of fun. And they've got they've got a whole set of discs for distances. Seem kind of silly. Of course, I was a delinquent, so I know how to throw a Frisbee like a pro. So I played it a couple of times. It's actually a lot of fun.
Okay, Norman Bates says in the chat room, "You are losing me, gents, and I'm the only one keeping this chat alive." Okay,
right.
So
feed us the subject, Norman.
Let's get back to the Torah portion. Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Moses says, "You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did at Baal Peor." That's when God wiped out everyone who fornicated with the Midianite women. "The Lord your God destroyed from among you everyone who followed the Baal of Peor. But all of you who held fast to the Lord your God are still alive today." So it seems like gross public sexual sins are one of the things that God destroys people for. So widespread homosexuality was a major reason that God destroyed the world in the flood. For example, according to commentator Rashi, it was because they had legal same-sex marriage in that world, and God found that giving legal sanction to same-sex marriage was so repugnant that he just decided to destroy the whole world in the flood. Later, God destroys Sodom. God repeatedly destroys the Israelites for sexual sins. Dennis Dale, why is God so uptight about sexual sins?
Because it ultimately leads to the destruction of humanity, right? He keeps telling us, and we're pressing it again. And I'm wondering, where is the retribution going to come now, right? I don't see how it comes, but you think it must come somehow. We'll destroy ourselves. If there's no God out there to do it for us, we'll do it. Yeah, I mean, look what's happening now. It's so astounding. Again, I try not to read too much into stuff, but I read the Torah, and it's prophetic, right? We're in this time now, this Kali Yuga, sexual degeneracy. We were being warned. The Hebrews, at least, were being warned. The Jews were warned, and we've been warned. And we're just going to press it. It just seems man's inevitably going to do what we're doing now is basically cursing God. You know what I mean? We're just cursing nature. We're, you know, because all of this stuff is up against nature. And if you view God as nature, you know, then you could get an idea of what's going on now too. You know, of these people are just thumbing their nose at nature. You know, oh, I'm not a man, I'm a woman. You know, everything. Not just the trans movement, but feminism, of course, too, has largely been about denying biological reality.
And many people want to be laissez-faire about sexuality and say, like, how does it affect me? Why does it affect me? What people do in the privacy of their own bedroom. But how has that worked out for us? Like, I don't want to make homosexuality illegal. Like, I really don't want the police busting into people's bedrooms and arresting them for homosexual sodomy. But I got to admit, the world where homosexuality was illegal is a far superior world to the one we have today.
Yeah, no, I'm
basic morality.
I'm for a little bit of hypocrisy that we had before, where it's, you know, we weren't throwing gays off of roofs, and
Right.
you know, but we didn't have this, right? We can't find, that's the thing, you can't really find a medium. You know what I mean? We can't seem to. We liberalize sexual relations, and we've got this explosion in female sluttiness, and now, then it was gay men, and now it's, you know, this a third stage, even more absurd, you know, trans nonsense. Yeah, you can't. We've been trained to think of it as individual. It's our curse, our enlightenment curse, that we think everything's about your personal liberty and values. And of course, sexuality is all about the community. We think it's the most personal decision of all, but in fact, it's almost the most consequential of all, because, you know, once enough people start, for instance, opting out of heterosexual relations, you know, you've suddenly changed society for the worst. For the worse.
Jakey Jake claims that frisbee golf is gay.
I know, he would.
We reject that, Jake. And Glib Medley says Moses tried golf, but the clubs kept turning into serpents.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tried to be like, we decriminalized homosexuality, and then there was just an explosion in homosexual bad behavior. Like, if you just looked at things from the perspective of what's best for gays, it would seem that what's best for gays is to make homosexuality illegal, because that puts constraints on homosexual promiscuity that simply aren't there when you legalize gay sex. And how has promiscuity served the gay community? Like, most gays have STDs. There's been this explosion of
true.
AIDS.
Democratized. Yeah. Democratizing it.
It's been horrible for the gay community legalizing homosexuality. It's a little bit similar to how Jews reacted to Napoleon. So modern Jews said, yay, Napoleon will let us out of our ghettos and allow us to become a part of modern society, become citizens of Gentile countries, and to participate more fully without discrimination. Traditional rabbi says this is horrible because, yeah, all those things will happen, but then Jews will assimilate, they'll abandon the Torah, and they will, you know, they'll push, you know, communism and radical stuff that will be hugely destructive to both Jews and Gentiles. So on the face of it, it would seem that removing legal impediments to Jews participating fully in society would be a wonderful thing for Jews, but it hasn't necessarily worked out that way. And similarly, removing the criminalization of homosexuality has just been a disaster by and large for the gay community, because it's allowed them to act on their worst instincts, just as removing all impediments from Jews participating in society has allowed for this massive explosion of Jewish money, Jewish activism, Jewish energy into promoting suicidal left-wing policies.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. But you know, the people who the gay leadership now doesn't really care about individual misery out there. He sees this growing community, growing ever stronger community. You know, this new identity of gays that he leads. And he doesn't care that there's more and more misery among them. And the number, you know, their numbers are growing. It's like gays are like a nation now, like a diaspora, global diaspora, right? It's kind of forming into one. I mean, you could say that it's been bad for Jews, but I see Jewish history of the last couple hundred years as being, you know, the culmination. If I was Jewish, I would be thinking, this is all destiny, that we had to go through the Holocaust so Israel could be born and we could return to the land. It's astounding to me. I don't think we appreciate it. When I go back and read about when Israel was established, I'm astounded that there were still Jews who were resistant to it, or Jews who weren't that moved by it, apparently, right? And it wasn't a big deal maybe until around 67 when the war came and Israel was under real threat. But to anybody living in the time, you'd have to be thinking, this is biblical stuff going on in my time. I can't see how it is anything else. You know, even an atheist like me has to wonder, you know, if there's God and there's a history and he favors these people.
The purpose of Jewish law is to look wise in the eyes of the non-Jews. So Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 5, see, I have taught you decrees and laws as the Lord my God commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of it. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. What other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way the Lord our God is near us whenever we pray to him? What other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws I'm setting before you today? Somehow I don't feel that this is the primary reaction of non-Jews to Jews today. I don't think their primary reaction is, wow, this is a great nation full of wise and understanding people with awesome laws. Instead, I think the primary reaction is, this is a tricky people. This is a people who pursued their own interests frequently at the expense of other people's. There's a lot of dishonesty in the way they do business. Why are they pushing feminism? Why are they so prominent behind the pornography and rap industries and destructive things like Hollywood and left-wing activism? Somehow this vision of the Jewish people is not really operating in the world today. I have to take a break. Claire, I encourage you to unmute, and I'll leave it in Dennis and Claire's hands for a minute.
I would note at least that here in America and in the West, Jews are regarded higher than ever. And Jews have successfully argued themselves in. I remember reading this passage that Luke just quoted and was struck, thinking about, this is still the mission for secular Jews. This is still what they want the world to see. Israel as a light, as a light of enlightenment now. Yeah, so it continues. Right, Claire? But yeah, I don't know that Jews are viewed unfavorably where, you know, in the Mideast because of the conflict with Israel and the Arab states. Yeah, I'm not sure it's entirely true. Jews are in a better spot now, I think, than they've been ever. At the same time, because that spot involves a more powerful and influential position there's all the peril that comes with that. Jews are now powerful globally. They're assuming something like an imperial sort of status this weird way. And that's going to bring more and more, I think, yeah, anti-Semitism. There's going to be conflict. But you'll note also that where there should be supposedly anti-Semitism in the West and problems for Jews, Eastern Europe, places like Poland and Hungary now that are resisting the globo homo pos. These are places where a Jew will be safe because there won't be a lot of Muslims around to bother them. These are places that are establishing warm relations with Israel. Of course, Netanyahu and Orban seem very close. And they have a natural affinity as nationalist, ethno-nationalist states, basically. So yeah, there's no real. I think Israel's in a good spot. The people who aren't in a good spot are us here in America, and that includes U.S. Jews. Whatever you think about what U.S. Jews have done to get us here, they remain threatened as much by the pause that they've been so instrumental and so successful in pushing, as much as anyone else. Right? Press 1 for yoga pants. Day 5. What is Manic's handle now, Paul Bunyan? Luke is changing into the yoga pants now, guys. So be careful what you wish for, but you will get those. I think he's stuffing a sock down the front of them right now. You don't need proof of circumcision. You may get it, Paul. You may get it. I'm wearing yoga pants here, but I'm not wearing pants at all. It's 80 degrees here. All right. So anyway, look, I have taught you statutes and laws as the Eternal, my God, commanded me, for you to do them within the land which you are entering to take possession of. You shall safeguard these laws and do them, for through this you will be considered wise and intelligent in the eyes of the nations, who will hear about all these statutes and say, this great nation is purely a wise and intelligent people. For which other great nation has God close to them to accept their prayers, like the eternal our God is close to us whenever we pray to him. This is an example of our God is greater too. Dennis, what do you think of Evola? I haven't read my Evola. Can I show you something? I don't know if you can see this finger. I completely dislocated this finger on a stupid rope slide. I was hiking at a creek, and there was these kids that set up a rope swing under a bridge, and you could swing down into this water, of course. It was awesome. And so I did it, and I tried to do something weird. Anyway, I ended up sliding down this rope, and I hit a knot in the rope. There are these knots where you grip the rope, and I slid down, and I slid right through like 3 of these stupid knots. Both ring fingers somehow become dislocated. This one was like popped out, and I was like moving it around. It's still kind of out. I don't know if you can see that. And it was all purple. Like there's a little band left here. It was all purple. So I've been out of it for like, that was like what, Monday. So I've been pretty much out of it. Unable to do anything really. Even self-abuse is not available to me at this point. Sorry if you heard that, Claire. Yeah, so I do want to get out again. Anyway, okay, so we're talking about Torah. Hi, Mike Smith. Shalom, he says. The face when Claire replaced Mannequin. I'm waiting for Claire to come back. Claire, come back to the mic, because I'm trying to vamp here all by myself. We're talking about the gays, right? Luke says, this is an interesting question. Is sexual gay liberation bad for gays or good for gays? I think it's depends on how you look at it, right? There are leaders, like I said. Dennis, bring the degeneracy to a panel with Outlook. Obviously, these people who are pushing this pro-globo homo agenda don't really care that there are all these people out there suffering. Obviously, these people who are pushing trans, think of the trans movement, and think of how enthusiastically everybody's jumped on it. And think of how much misery it is producing almost out of nothing, really. Because like I said, I'm around Portland downtown, so I see lots of sort of the worst sort of this stuff. And I'm convinced that it's become a trend, that there are confused young men now who are just adopting it because it's out there, this great big movement. Of course they are. How would they not be, right? So what you realize what is happening is they've created this whole thing, this whole means by a means by which people can express their psychological dysfunction. You know, it's a bizarre situation. They're creating misery. I mean, these people, what these guys needed, what these guys really need is for a totally more controlled, less sexually liberated society where they don't have to cast about for identity. They can just relax. Anyway, they're in this, you know, they're already crazy. Here comes the trans movement, just sucks them up. And it's going to just spit them out when it's done with them too. And it's doing it right now. Well, obviously we all know the answer to that question, Brundle. Jake's mom is fasting today. All right. Anyway, here comes Luke Ford again, back from the brink. Well, Luke, everything got totally out of hand while you were gone. But
oh no!
Yeah.
What happened?
Nothing. I've been sitting here flailing away. Claire's gone, and
Claire's gone.
Brundle's asking inappropriate questions in chat.
Oh man. Okay, back to this week's Torah portion, and the idea that the purpose of the divine revelation was to make Jews look good in front of others. This reminds me of why I don't mind public discussions of the JQ. Of course, I prefer discussions that are accurate and fair to discussions that are false and distorted. But I think it's smart for all groups to be asked, are you making the wider society better? So Jews benefit from accurate criticism, blacks benefit from accurate criticism, WASPs benefit from accurate criticism, Catholics benefit from accurate criticism. So that's why I'm all for open discussion of the Jewish question, the black question, the Muslim question, the Catholic question, the Irish question. We see in this week's Torah portion, the purpose of the divine revelation, the purpose of the Torah is to make Jews look wise and great to non-Jews. And if Jews are practicing the Torah or practicing their way of life in a way that doesn't do this, then that's not what the system is designed for. And so it's a call to return to a way of life that makes you a blessing to those around you rather than a curse. Because if any minority consistently becomes a curse to the majority, all they're doing is creating rational incentives for the majority to get rid of them. And so it's better to discuss the JQ than to start sticking people into gas chambers.
Is it always better to discuss everything?
Yeah.
Because I think obviously people in power always come to the conclusion that there's a lot of things that should not be discussed. It's inevitable that, you know, even in our own relatively freer times, you couldn't say whatever you wanted. There was a great deal of, if not legal, at least customary restrictions on what was said. You know, certain things weren't spoken about. I worry that we don't have the capacity anymore. You say minority groups need to be able to be criticized, but now we fetishize minority status, and it's you know, it's almost a given that minority groups in the West, you know, can't be wrong in a sense.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it just doesn't work. It
doesn't.
increases anger, and there's just going to be a reaction. So the reaction probably won't be moderate and proportionate. The reactions are usually pretty strong. Like reactions are like what the Nazis did after the Weimar Republic. So right now we're living in Weimar America. The reaction could be pretty stiff. Right now, only the left wing is just Antifa is creating massive violence, disruption, people getting fired, people are getting kicked out of restaurants simply for being part of the Trump administration. At some point, the right wing is going to say that's enough, and they're going to respond, and I doubt it will be proportionate.
Do you think so? Yeah, I think it should. Common sense tells us something's got to give, but I don't see how it forms. I mean, you know, there was this thing called the alt-right, and everybody seems quite glad to bury it now and forget it. You know, so I don't know what the next impulse looks like. You know, maybe we can. I
have no idea either.
Scary.
I do know this: if something cannot go on, it won't.
But all the radicalism still produces out of the left, right? You would think there would be these radicals coming out of the right, masking up and taking to the streets, but it's the left, and they seem to have plenty of recruits for Antifa still. They're going to get it on here in Portland again on August 4th. I'll try and get out and check that out.
So how are things in Portland these days with Antifa?
Don't see them around. Like you said, we had that incident a couple of weeks ago, and again, these Patriot Prayer right-wing guys are coming back on the 4th. But there's ICE has been under siege, is still under siege. The ICE. You may have seen some viral video of the latest arrests there at the ICE office here in Portland, where they all of a sudden the SJW kids start shouting the N-word at one of the DHS cops. It's really weird. You know, I don't know what that was about.
And we have Eki Lux joining us, so feel free to unmute and weigh in when you're ready, Eki. And
shine the Lux on us.
Yeah, shine the Lux on us. And I'll go back. Hey, Eki, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much. I just noticed the general topic, and it's always on my mind. It is always on my mind. But that's only because I live in Los Angeles. I think that you were, I only popped in just a moment ago, but you were mentioning something about the possibility of a disproportionate response. And I think that that's possible. And it really distresses me because it's difficult to explain when you attack someone for long enough and a person is very reserved in their conduct, there almost seems to be like, yeah, exactly, a disproportionate response. There's a concept that I noticed with certain Anglo types where they tend to be a very honor-based and dignified based in terms of their mentality. And if you disrupt their sense of dignity, they will act out in ways that seem very, very bizarre, because you're not actually physically attacking them. You're attacking their sense of pride and honor and dignity. And that seems to be much more important. And that's kind of what I feel like may end up happening. And I don't like it.
Yeah. And Eki, you've been very busy the past 2 weeks. What's been going on with your channel? Eki, you there? Okay, Eki's not there anymore. So I'll go back to the show from the Torah portion this week. Only be careful, watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things that your eyes have seen, or let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when he said to me, assemble the people before me to hear my words, so that they may learn to revere me as long as they live in the land, and may teach them to their children. And it's natural to forget things that are inconvenient. So people don't generally want to remember restrictions on their choices, restrictions on their sexual choices in particular. And so the Torah is saying over and over and over again, first of all, be careful rather than vague. Okay. Vagueness is a way to check out from unpleasant parts of reality. Watch yourselves closely. So monitor your own behavior rather than simply monitoring other people's behavior. And do not forget the things that you have seen and heard. Teach them to your children and to their children after them. And it's just human nature to want to forget things that are inconvenient. You'll notice that when people make mistakes with finances, with paying bills, they inevitably tend to make mistakes that benefit them. So when you see a person who is always making mistakes, but mistakes that benefit them, you're dealing with a crook. And when it comes to, say, David Irving, whenever he's distorting the historical record, it's always to make the Nazis look good and to make the Jews look bad. And like we all err, but when someone has a consistent track record in a particular direction, it just makes you distrust them. So I like this advice. Be careful, monitor yourselves. Be careful, monitor yourselves. Do not forget, teach these things to your children. And this seems to be very practical advice that's very in tune with the way human nature works, because human nature is to forget the things that we want to forget. I had this girlfriend, she had this very annoying habit. Whenever I said something that she didn't want to hear, she would just ignore
it. Coming back to the whole erring on the side of pro-Nazi thing, there's a peculiarity that I noticed a little while ago, which is that a lot of people that go through some kind of a paradigm shift, they frequently say, oh, okay, well, I was wrong about this one thing, therefore I might be wrong about everything, which is a fairly healthy mentality when you stop and think about it, because then it allows you to learn new things, see things through a new lens. It's good. And one of the funny things about people on the alt-right is that they have a tendency to view they do the same thing to the Nazi Party, and they view it through sort of a rose-colored lens. And I think that that's something that is intriguing for a variety of reasons, because I do regard it as being a fundamentally complex issue. One of the things that, speaking for myself, I only speak for myself, I ended up actually really liking one single aspect of the model for what happened in Germany in the 1930s. From the standpoint of just examining the real-life situation. And the real-life situation was stunning to me once I realized that on a basic level, the Nazis, they were actually largely anti-communist. Once I realized that, my entire idea of what happened completely changed. Obviously, I still am vehemently opposed to death and destruction. I don't like violence in the least. But at the same time, when you understand that they were going up against literal communists, I mean, that's just a hell of a thing. And sometimes I think that people get a little carried away with that. I think they go a little too far with it. But it is funny that once you start to notice things, the situation does sort of becomes more interesting. Anyway.
Yeah.
People forget perhaps what was happening in Russia was known in Germany, and they expected those Bolsheviks to come out of the East and do what they were doing there, you know, in Germany, right? Of course, you can blame the Germans for all their problems for sending Lenin to Russia in the first place. Maybe they should have just executed Lenin, and who knows what would have happened. I don't know. I thought maybe I had something to say about that.
Yeah, well, but they weren't going to. One of the problems with the whole communist deal is that when you stop and think about it, the Western world largely made a deal with the devil, and the devil in this case is communism. The only guys that were authentically battling against the commies were the Nazis. and of course, to some extent, the other Axis powers. But when you think about it, the communists, they went and moved directly into academia here in America and also across all of Europe. So, I mean, in a way, the rot set in the late 1800s, and all we saw was kind of a situation that came to a head in the early 1900s. That's the way that I see it.
It's interesting what happens after World War II, though, isn't it? Because we instantly go into the Cold War. The states are opposed, and the ideologies are opposed. Yet culturally, the customs were changing. Right? You're talking about that slow march to the institution was underway. Yeah. Probably already taken place. Really, you go back to the 30s, and so that really was uninterrupted. In fact, it was just boosted by our alliance with the damned Soviets in World War II. Yeah. World War II is such a disaster. For me, it goes back to World War I and the Brits not wanting to allow the Germans to expand into their global markets. And if the Brits had handled things a little better, we wouldn't be in this mess. But
yeah, I'm sorry to say that I don't know as much about World War I as I could know. So a lot of discussion for me only revolves around what was going on in the communist sphere.
Sorry, go ahead if you finish your point.
Oh yeah, just with regards to the whole British Empire issue. I'm sorry to say I actually am ignorant on that topic, and it does suck. That's all.
I'd encourage you guys to join us Friday if you possibly can. We are discussing John J. Mearsheimer's classic work, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. It's, I think, the most important work of political science in the past 50 years. And there's some real talk in there about what happened in World War I, World War II, what was driving those conflicts, and what leads to these wars. And let me just I can email the book to anyone. Let me just read a little bit from Mearsheimer, The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. Germany's aggressive foreign policy behavior was driven mainly by strategic calculations. Security was always a burning issue for Germany because of geography. It is located in the center of Europe, with few natural defensive barriers on either its eastern or its western flank, which makes it vulnerable to invasion. Consequently, German leaders were always on the lookout for opportunities to gain power and enhance the prospects for their country's survival. This is not to deny that other factors influenced German foreign policy. Consider, for example, German behavior under its two most famous leaders, Otto von Bismarck and Adolf Hitler. Although Bismarck is usually considered an artful practitioner of realpolitik, he was motivated by nationalism as well as security concerns when he started and won wars in 1864, 1866, and 1870. Specifically, he not only sought to expand Prussia's borders, and make it more secure, but also was determined to create a unified German state. There is no doubt that Hitler's aggression was motivated in good part by a deep-seated racist ideology. Nevertheless, straightforward power calculations were central to Hitler's thinking about international politics. Since 1945, scholars have debated how much continuity links the Nazis and their predecessors. In the foreign policy realm, however, there is widespread agreement that Hitler did not represent a sharp break with the past, but instead thought and behaved like German leaders before him. David Kallio puts the point well. In foreign policy, the similarity between Imperial and Nazi Germany are manifest. Hitler shared the same geopolitical analysis, the same certainty about conflict among nations, the same craving and rationale for hegemony over Europe. The First World War, he could claim, only sharpened the validity of that geopolitical analysis. Even without Hitler and his murderous ideology, Germany surely would have been an aggressive state by the late 1930s. The best way to determine whether an aggressor such as Japan or Germany was engaged in self-defeating behavior is to focus on the decision-making process that led it to initiate war, not the outcome of the conflict. A careful analysis of the Japanese and German cases reveals that, in each instance, the decision for war was a reasonable response to the particular circumstances each state faced. These were not irrational decisions fueled by malign political forces on the home front. Furthermore, even though Napoleon, Kaiser Wilhelm, and Hitler all lost their bids to dominate Europe, each won major battlefield victories, conquered huge tracts of territory, and came close to achieving their goals. Only Japan stood little chance of winning hegemony on the battlefield. But as we shall see, Japanese policymakers knew that they would probably lose, went to war only because the United States left them with no reasonable alternative. The German decision to push for war in 1914 was not a case of wacky strategic ideas pushing a state to start a war it was sure to lose. It was a calculated risk motivated in large part by Germany's desire to break its encirclement by the Triple Entente, prevent the growth of Russian power, and become Europe's hegemon. The precipitating event was a crisis in the Balkans between Austria-Hungary and Serbia, in which Germany sided with the former and Russia with the latter. German leaders clearly understood that they would have to fight a two-front war and that the Schlieffen Plan did not guarantee victory. Nevertheless, they thought that the risk was worth taking, especially since Germany was so much more powerful than either France or Russia at the time, and there was good reason to think that the United Kingdom might remain on the sidelines. They almost proved right. The Schlieffen Plan narrowly missed producing a quick and decisive victory in 1914. As political scientist Scott Sagan notes, it was for good reason that the French referred to their last second victory near Paris in September 1914 as the miracle of the Marne. Moreover, Germany almost won the subsequent war of attrition between 1915 and 1918. The Kaiser's armies knocked Russia out of the war in the fall of 1917, and they had the British and especially the French armies on the ropes in the spring of 1918. Had it not been for American intervention at the last moment, Germany might have won World War I. The discussion of German behavior before World War I points to an anomaly for offensive realism. Germany had an excellent opportunity to gain hegemony in Europe in the summer of 1905. Not only was it a potential hegemon, but Russia was reeling from its defeat in the Far East and was in no position to defend itself against a German attack. Also, the United Kingdom was not yet allied with France and Russia. So France stood virtually alone against the mighty Germans, who had an opportunity without parallel to change the European balance in their favor. Yet Germany did not seriously consider going to war in 1905, but instead waited until 1914, when Russia had recovered from its defeat and the United Kingdom had joined forces with France and Russia. As for Nazi Germany, the charge against Hitler is that he should have learned from World War I that if Germany behaved aggressively, a balancing coalition would form and crush it once again in a bloody two-front war. The fact that Hitler ignored this obvious lesson and rushed headlong into the abyss, so the argument goes, must have been the result of a deeply irrational decision-making process. This indictment does not hold up on close inspection. There is no question that Hitler deserves a special place in the pantheon of mass murderers. His evilness should not obscure his skill as an adroit strategist who had a long run of successes before he made the fatal mistake of invading the Soviet Union in the summer of 1941. Hitler did indeed learn from World War I. He concluded that Germany had to avoid fighting on two fronts at the same time, that it needed a way to win quick and decisive military victories. He actually realized those goals in the early years of World War II, which is why the Third Reich was able to wreak so much death and destruction across Europe. Defeated states usually do not conclude that war is a futile enterprise. Instead, they strive to make sure that they do not repeat mistakes in the next war. Hitler's diplomacy was carefully calculated to keep his adversaries from forming a balancing coalition against Germany so that the Wehrmacht could defeat them one at a time. The key to success was preventing the Soviet Union from joining forces with the United Kingdom and France, thus recreating the Triple Entente. He succeeded. In fact, the Soviet Union helped the Wehrmacht carve up Poland in September of 1939, even though the United Kingdom and France had declared war against Germany for having invaded Poland. During the following summer of 1940, the Soviet Union stood on the sidelines while the German army overran France and pushed the British army off the continent at Dunkirk. When Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, France was out of the war, the United States was not yet in, and the United Kingdom was not a serious threat to Germany. So the Wehrmacht was effectively able to fight a one-front war against the Red Army in 1941. Much of Hitler's success was due to the machinations of his rivals, but there is little doubt that Hitler acted skillfully. He not only played his adversaries off against one another, but he went to considerable lengths to convince them that Nazi Germany had benign intentions. As Norman Rich notes, to conceal or obscure whatever his real intentions may have been, Hitler dedicated no small part of his diplomatic and propagandistic skill. In his public speeches and diplomatic conversations, he monotonously intoned his desire for peace. He signed friendship treaties and non-aggression pacts. He was lavish with assurances of goodwill. Hitler surely understood that the blustery rhetoric of Kaiser Wilhelm and other German leaders before World War I had been a mistake. Hitler also recognized the need to fashion a military instrument that could win quick victories and avoid the bloody battles of World War I. To that end, he supported the building of panzer divisions and played an important role in designing the blitzkrieg strategy that helped Germany win one of the most stunning military victories of all time in France in 1940. Hitler's Wehrmacht also won stunning victories against minor powers, Poland, Norway, Yugoslavia, and Greece. As Sebastian Hafner notes, from 1930 until 1941, Hitler succeeded in practically everything he undertook in domestic and foreign politics, eventually also in the military field, to the amazement of the world. If Hitler had died in July of 1940, after France capitulated, he probably would have been considered one of the greatest German statesmen. Hitler made a critical mistake that led to the destruction of the Third Reich. He unleashed the Wehrmacht against the Soviet Union in June of 1941, and this time the German blitzkrieg failed to produce a quick and decisive victory. Instead, a savage war of attrition set in on the Eastern Front, which the Wehrmacht eventually lost to the Red Army. Compounding matters, the United States came into the war in December of 1941 and eventually opened up a second front in the West. Given the disastrous consequences of attacking the Soviet Union, one might think that there was abundant evidence beforehand that the Soviet Union would win the war, that Hitler was warned repeatedly that launching Operation Barbarossa was tantamount to committing national suicide, and that he did it anyway because he was not a rational calculator. The evidence, however, does not support this interpretation. There was little resistance among the German elite to Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union. In fact, there was considerable enthusiasm for the gambit. Some generals were dissatisfied with important aspects of the final plan, and a few planners and policymakers thought that the Red Army might not succumb to the German blitzkrieg. Nevertheless, there was a powerful consensus within the German elite that the Wehrmacht would quickly rout the Soviets, much the way it had defeated the British and French armies a year earlier. It was also widely believed in both the United Kingdom and the United States that Germany would defeat the Soviet Union in 1941. Indeed, there was good reason to think that the Red Army would collapse in the face of the German assault. Stalin's massive purges of his army in the late 1930s had markedly reduced its fighting power. And almost as if to prove the point, the Red Army performed badly in its war against Finland. Plus, the Wehrmacht was a finely tuned fighting force by June of 1941. In the end, Hitler and his lieutenants simply miscalculated the outcome of Operation Barbarossa. They made a wrong decision, not an irrational one, and that sometimes happened. Final point about Germany's two failed attempts at hegemony. Hafner wrote during the Cold War of the wide belief that it was a mistake from the very start for Germany to have attempted to dominate Europe. He emphasized how members of the younger generation in what was then West Germany often stare at their fathers and grandfathers as though they were lunatics ever to have set themselves such a goal. He notes, however, it should be remembered that the majority of those fathers and grandfathers, the generation of the First and Second World War, regarded the goal as reasonable and attainable. They were inspired by it and not infrequently died for it. The end.
That's remarkable. Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense too.
I don't know.
People usually think that if you lose, that means that you're irrationally calculating your war plan, but it doesn't necessarily mean that at all.
Well, now we overstate his obsession with the Jews. I don't want to understate it, but now we talk about it as if this was the impetus for everything.
Yeah,
His anti-Semitism. I don't buy that. Sorry, Yeki.
Oh no, just that entire, because I understand that there are multiple inputs for what happened in World War II, but I really think that the lack of discussion of the concept of communist, actual Bolsheviks going into Germany in 1919 and basically going on an execution/murder campaign, the fact that that wasn't discussed in any of that sort of strikes me as a giant blind spot. It's very easy to say that Hitler caused the death of millions of people, which he did. But at the same time, he was acting in response to a multitude of factors, amongst which was a literal, actual murder campaign that happened in Germany when he was just out of the army. And I really think that on a psychological level, it's important to understand that, in essence, because consider this: the Antifa logo with the two flags, the black and the red flag. The Antifa logo is fashioned after the communist logo that was used in Germany in the 1930s. It's a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of the image that's actually being shown. As bad as the Antifa people are now, they have yet to move into actually murdering people. For the moment, all that they're doing is a combination of physical brute force intimidation and financial terrorism. The moment they move into actually murdering people, and I do think that they're going to Lord of the Flies someone, by the way. The moment they do that, that's when I think the real response will take place. And it's this kind of an emotional bubbling over that happened in Germany as well. Because it's not like the communists just spontaneously showed up for no reason. They were there for quite some time, doing things for quite some time. And the Germans had no choice but to acknowledge that this was their situation. And I think that with Hitler, he acted as a galvanizing force, sort of a focal point to things that Germany in general was going through. A lot of this, you'll hear discussions about, oh, Hitler did this and Hitler did that and so on. And all he did was just say, okay, this is what's going on. Now go ahead and act, Germans. You Germans go and do things. And the Germans did. I think that it's much larger than just limiting it to a single person. So I view the entire situation. I view the text that Luke Ford read as being kind of elucidating, as long as you intentionally omit the factor of the communists. I know that I have a fixation on the communists. I get it, but I genuinely do think that that's an important factor that is overlooked to the point of being a liability when I read about interpretations of World War II. Okay, that's it. That's my thought. I'm done.
No, that's good. He leaves out the ideological aspect, doesn't he?
Yeah, Mitch doesn't bother with ideology because he views the world through the lens of realism, that ideology doesn't matter as to a state's capacity to unleash war. And so your neighbor's capacity to unleash war determines the strategies that you have to take to defend yourself. And so he says that Mearsheimer notes there's just no connection between a state's ideology and political organization, and whether or not it's going to act in its self-interest. Of course, states, generally speaking, act in their self-interest. Frequently, that means conquering neighboring states, and you can't expect a state to abstain from acting in its self-interest just because it's a liberal democracy, or just because it's a fascist state, or just because it's a communist state. All states are operating under the same realistic laws that there's no ultimate authority that you can call upon, and that nations wax and wane, expand or get conquered according to the natural laws of power.
Often ideology is a front for something else too. Hitler came from what, Linz? And he hated the Slavs because he was from this sort of border region where he saw the problems between Germans and Slavs up close, and he came to dislike them. And he associated the Bolsheviks with the Slavs, the Russians, the hated, and the Jews, of course. And that was a big part of it for him. I don't think Mearsheimer, ideology is important, but I mean, that's a powerful passage in that it shows us everything that they actually did historically makes perfect sense from an imperial point of view. And yeah, I mean, Germany was going to want to expand. When Bismarck cobbled that thing together, 1870, he all of a sudden put together maybe the greatest concentration of energy, human capacity in the world at the time, and all those millions of industrious and ambitious Germans there wanting to expand. And I think the ideology comes after. Not that it's meaningless, but
and it's not so much that Germany would want to expand, it's that it either had to expand or it was going to be vulnerable to being taken over. Stalin was planning to invade Western Europe. Stalin was planning to invade Germany, take over Western Europe. And it was only because his army was such a mess that he didn't initiate an attack on Germany before Germany unleashed an attack on him. So Germany is surrounded by historically hostile powers of France and Russia, and Germany has no natural defensible borders. So in that situation, Germany either had to go for the gusto to take on dominance of Europe, or it was just laying itself wide open to someone else overcoming Germany. If Soviet Union had planned and executed the invasion of Germany and Western Europe, they might most likely would have won. They would have just overwhelmed Germany. And so you can't just sit back at times in life and hope other people will do the quote unquote right thing when incentives for other actors are to run you over.
Hitler had a point. He said he was defending Europe from the Bolsheviks, wasn't he? Who else was? And it speaks to this idea of power politics overwhelming everything else, in that we all sided with the Soviets when it came time to keep the German monster down. We sided with the Reds. Ideology didn't really mean anything. What meant something was that we were siding. I think back then we were siding with our Anglo cousins against the Germans. That was the ultimate thing. I know the Jews here were very powerful, but it didn't originate. We didn't talk a lot about the anti-Semitism early on with Hitler or Mussolini or any of those other guys.
It's funny. My interpretation is not dissimilar, but I guess generally opposed, only in the sense that I think that, and I will catch flack for this. I know I will catch flack for this, but I think we fought on the wrong side. That's my own opinion. I think that it was a silly mistake to side with the Soviets. If I had been in charge, I would have withdrawn. I would have intentionally allowed the situation to run of its own accord, specifically because I absolutely despise communists. But that's just me. And I'm starting to see an echo of the past come up right now, and it's very distressing to me. I mean, because it's interesting to hear about the past and what happened, and as the old saying goes, history rhymes or something, and I think we're catching similes and homonyms right now with regards to things that happened in the past, and some of it I do find quite troubling, and I do fear that we could end up in a situation within my lifetime where something not dissimilar happens, like on a larger level. I genuinely find it distressing. I honestly do think that the core thing to remember when the concept of Hitler defending Europe comes up, I genuinely think that in terms of the ideological push, it was actually a reaction to what was going on with the communists. Luke Ford said just a few moments ago that if the Soviets had organized themselves in a directed campaign or something, well, but they did. They actually did organize themselves in a directed campaign. And it's based on the idea that if they initiated a worker revolt, a proletariat uprising, then everyone would go up against the bourgeoisie and just kill them all. That's exactly what the Bolsheviks did when they went into Europe. That's exactly what they did when they went into Berlin on their murder campaign in 1919. They were gambling that the other Germans would say, "Oh wow, look, we're all, you know, killing the merchants and the business owners and the other people like this, the higher status individuals. Let's also go join in this giant murder campaign, and then overthrow the whole thing, and then we'll all institute worldwide communism, hold hands or whatever." Obviously, that did not happen, and that's because, you know, obviously, when you're faced with people that are murdering you, you're going to get quite upset. That's what happened to the Germans. And most Germans felt badly about this. Most Germans did not care for being murdered or watching their fellow Germans get murdered by the Bolsheviks. I always come back to the idea that Hitler was little more than just a galvanizing force for a latent mentality that existed at the time. It's just, I don't know. It's just a thing. That's all.
Content Watcher has a hilarious comment. He says, "You got to accept the globo homo gayplex because it would be violent to seriously oppose it." That's hilarious. Now, Mearsheimer is great in this book because he points out that for all the American rhetoric about liberal democracy and human rights, the way America has acted in these major wars is in self-interest. It is in America's self-interest to allow these European powers to bloody each other and bludgeon each other. But as soon as there was a threat that one power would develop hegemony, dominance over Europe, that's against America's interest, because let's just say Germany comes to dominate Europe. If Germany is allowed to dominate Europe, then it is free to roam around the rest of the world. The reason the United States intervenes all over God's little green acre is because it's free to roam, because it doesn't have any threats in its backyard. So if Germany had no threats in Europe to worry about, then it would be free to roam in South America and East Asia and the Middle East. And so that would be against America's self-interest. So the United States sat back, let European powers pound each other to death, obviously not applauding that, but that was in their self-interest. And then as soon as there was a threat to American dominance, when in both World War I and World War II, Germany threatened to gain dominance over Europe, then and only then did America intervene. So initially, it just allowed other nations to fight themselves to death. Both World War I, World War II, America only intervened at the last possible moment. And as a consequence, they came to dominate the world with very little loss of life. American loss of life in World War I and World War II was tiny compared to what the British, French, Germans, and Russians suffered. So if you stand back, let your competitors bludgeon themselves into a mess, and then you only intervene at the last moment, you can wipe up your competitors and you can take control. So the way the United States operated in both of the world wars was in a very cool, cold-hearted, rational way, completely in line with Mearsheimer's realism doctrines and completely at odds with the American fine rhetoric about the benefits of liberal democracy.
Look what we did. We swept in late, right? Swept in late and collected all the spoils. You know, I don't want to make light of it, but yeah, you know, I mean, the Russians lost millions of people, civilians. They absorbed the Sixth Army. We lost like 30,000, 40,000 people. Pretty insane. Today, we wouldn't sustain those numbers, but still, yeah, nothing compared to what Europe went through. Pretty slick on our part, I'd say. But we let the Russian bear live, and we elevated Soviet communism in the process and brought on the Cold War. Basically brought this globo homo gayplex upon ourselves, I think, ultimately.
This is why I always come from the standpoint now that we lost World War II.
I agree. I gotta step away for a second.
I don't agree. I think we won World War II. We dominated the globe, and then we self-destructed the exact same way all great empires have self-destructed, meaning we allowed the replacement of the people who created greatness by people of a different genetic makeup. So all great powers, rise to power with a particular genetic makeup, and then as they become powerful, mighty, and rich, they attract people of a different genetic makeup who pour in, and then they dilute the genetics and the DNA that created greatness. And I think that's what's going on in the United States today. I don't see it as World War II. I see that starting in 1965, the United States lost the will to maintain its genetic heritage, its particular people.
I do agree with that, but at the same time, the only reason that we got to that point is because of the slow decay that happened. Now, of course, this has to be tracked back a couple hundred years. So I understand that my fixation on the communists is largely arbitrary. I do understand that, but the only way that the 1965 immigration policy was able to happen was because of the slow rot of communist infiltration within the U.S. federal government. That is to say, the communists did everything possible to ensure that they were going to take down Western civilization. And they understood full well that the proletariat uprising was never going to happen. So since their goal was to take down Western civilization, and they understood that there was never going to be a proletariat uprising, they decided to switch it over to a racial uprising. So the equation was that the bourgeoisie was no longer going to be merely just strictly class-based, but it was going to be racially based. The bourgeoisie were going to be the whites, and the proletarians were going to be the non-whites. So the concept was to import non-whites into America and into Europe, so that you could have your communist revolution, and it would be all along racial divisions. And unfortunately, this is exactly what's playing out. So I do agree with Luke Ford on this point. I just think that there are a couple of extra layers. Unfortunately, it's an incredibly complex and complicated at the same time situation. Difficult to parse, even for myself.
I wonder how much basic human sexual desire has to do with the death of civilizations, in that basically men want to stick it in anything that looks halfway decent. They don't particularly have great loyalty to their people and their nation's interests when there's an opportunity to have sex with low-class desperate refugees or outsiders. Men will do that. Think about all the Asian brides that American men brought back after World War II. Women also get some kind of tingle about immigrants. That I think both men and women enjoy being after snap-up people who are kind of desperate, people who don't have the same standards as the native population. And this very human tendency, I think, has got to be a significant reason for the fall of many great empires. Yeah. And it requires, therefore, some kind of societal discipline that severely restricts this. If you realize that your genetic heritage is the reason that your people has risen to prominence and your nation has become so powerful, you have to set forth some kind of standards to reduce the human desire to taste that mystery meat.
Well, once you've cut yourself loose from your ethnic history, I mean, we're unique in the West. And everywhere else, they take it for granted that you come from a given ethnic family. They don't maybe call it a race. Maybe it's not important as a race, but you come from a certain region, a certain place, and most of your, you protect this genetic legacy, whether you speak of it as such or not. We pathologize that mentality. So this is what we have. Our women see these dumbass refugees coming in, and they're just like big men, masculine men, but like children too. Like they're the ultimate for a dipshit Western woman who doesn't know what to do with herself. She could get a big bear of a guy who needs to be treated like a child. I mean, I think that's what they want. But you talk about men, women are more treacherous than men now, I think. And when you see white girls marrying out, we're like a defeated people. we're the refugees, and they're marrying out because their own men were the defeated men, and they're marrying into more successful future, the diverse future that's being advertised. Think about a young girl now, right? And she's being sort of coaxed into it. Have a mulatto kid. He'll be president someday. It's
Greg
better.
Greg Johnson says that when you see people pairing up, mating up outside of their race, there's always an instinctive feeling that there's something broken or wrong with them. And I think he has a point, and that doesn't mean that every single case of interracial relationships, reflects that there's something broken. No. But I do think, generally speaking, we do understand that someone who matches up and pairs up and marries outside of his race, that's coming from a place of brokenness.
Well, she said something earlier too, and it's also like taking advantage. You see, I think a lot of guys who bring back war brides say, you're marrying down, whether you think of it or not, to take the advantage of getting somebody lower on the class scale, because that's less of a challenge, and you can, you get this submissive wife. And I could kind of relate to that if you were an American guy now and you think American women are completely spoiled, and you find some traditional woman who's going to shut up and be nice, But yeah, I think that's the idea. And women go for that, marrying down, I think, nowadays. Also, this idea that the non-white men are damaged. Sorry, Eke.
Oh no, it's the large majority of people. I agree. There's a lot of damaged people out there, and it does. It's very unpleasant to look at sometimes. Here in Los Angeles, I see it all the time. There's a real sense of self-hatred, degradation. I'm not sure exactly what to call it, but just general ill feelings with regards to your own kind, and I refer to the white population, of course. There's a guy that I know personally. He's a millennial, and he once said to me, unironically, not as a joke, he meant it when he said it. He looked me in the eye as he said it. He said, "F white people," and I was like, and he's blonde-haired and blue-eyed. Yeah. And I saw the guy saying this, and I was horrified. I didn't know what to say. This happened a little over a year ago, so this is before I would have spat hot fire at him. But it's just so upsetting sometimes, because this is so pervasive in our culture and in our civilization that sometimes it throttles the imagination of what one can even do to combat the situation. I'm genuinely of the opinion that the majority of the leftists, they are an evolutionary cul-de-sac. They're going to implode demographically, and the only people that will continue to survive are only going to be the ones that physically breed, which means the conservatives. And this is going to have a twofold effect. On the one hand, we will suffer an incredible population collapse within my lifetime once the boomers die. And at the same time, after that population collapse occurs, there's going to be, of course, a period of unrest and instability. It's going to be fucking horrible. However, those who do survive, the ones that do bother themselves to reproduce, those people will be of a hardier stock, if only because they're the ones, they were born of the people who decided to survive. So the silver lining to the black cloud in our future is that the few people that do come out of this, they will be survivors. So thank God there's at least something to it. But oh my God, I completely agree. There's a really unfortunate thing where I'm witnessing the intentional destruction of my own lineage and heritage. It's awful to watch.
Well, what would confound that was the ethnic aspect. We're going to stop. Liberal, secular, white Westerners will stop breeding, but the Muslims aren't going to stop breeding. The conservative Muslims won't stop breeding. The conservative other folks will not stop breeding. They're just going to push us out. We're not going to have a chance. We're going to be such a small group, say, left, that the only option for this little rump population of white Americans will be join Globo Homo, send your children off to it if you want them to have a good life, or stay back here like the South Africans, in their little enclaves.
I actually think that what's going to end up happening is okay. So this is going to sound very cynical and terrible, Machiavellian even. The only reason that the God, there's no way for this to sound anything but just terrible.
Go for it.
The only reason that the Africans can have the population that they have really is because we feed them. And the moment we stop feeding them, they basically suffer their own larger collapse, just in terms of foodstuffs and housing and all that other good jazz. Once we stop feeding them, they collapse. And something similar is the case also for Mexicans and Middle Easterners. Once we stop feeding them, they go right back into the numbers that they used to have when they were subsisting on their own. So in some sense, the decimation, it's not the decimation. What am I talking about? We're not talking about reducing by 10% or 1/10. This is not a decimation. This is
collapse.
Yeah, this is ethnic cleansing is what's going on. But once the whites are no longer physically capable of feeding, clothing, and housing everyone else, their populations will reduce. So there does seem to be a larger balancing force that will take place. Again, it's not pleasant to think about, but I think that this is simply what's going to happen. The same thing happened in Zimbabwe. The same thing happened in, I forget, the one that was north, closer to Central Africa. I can't recall.
Uganda, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look what happened, though, dude. It should have happened that way, that, okay, the black South Africans want their country, and now the whites aren't producing anymore. But what happens is the same global community that forced apartheid out in the first place will prop up the South Africans as much as it can to keep it going. If things were to be allowed to take their course, maybe by now black South Africans would be handing some power back to their white neighbors and saying, yeah, run things again, because we can't.
Well, but they have yet to suffer their collapse. Rather, the white South Africans, they're still feeding the blacks. So as soon as they stop, it all ends. And I regret to say this, but I think that the only way that they will stop feeding the blacks is when they are actually massacred to the point that it's physically impossible for them to do so. Anyway, go on.
White South Africans are like the Jews in Egypt right now. They're captive people supporting these people, these ingrates, the black South Africans.
There's a great statement that South African whites would rather die in their beds than make their beds.
Yeah, that's the curse of everywhere, right? We imported all these slaves because we didn't want to pick cotton.
Great comment in the chat, quoting from some of the dire predictions of the Torah. This is the Torah's nightmare scenario. If you don't follow God's law, you will have sons and daughters, but you will not keep them because they will go into captivity. The foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will sink lower and lower. This is the Torah's perspective of a nightmare. This is like the most horrible thing that could possibly happen to you. The foreigners who reside among you will rise above you higher and higher, but you will sink lower and lower.
Heed it, right? It is our time, man. It's chilling how prophetic it is.
Yeah, welcome to America, buddy.
Yeah, it's our time, and that should be on a plaque somewhere.
Here's an interesting comment to Steve Saylor. It's amazing how immigration and climate is something you simply can't talk about. You just get shut up very quickly, from a guy who works in the climate field. I even did a little work on the idea of exactly how much carbon we were adding by importing half of Guatemala. My findings basically agree with what Steve Saylor found, except it's a lot bigger importing from Central America rather than Mexico, because Mexico has a much higher carbon per person output. But it's completely unpublishable. Nobody at an environmental economics journal will look at it at all. It drives me crazy how doctrinaire conservatives are about climate change. There's something happening for sure. It does seem to be getting hotter, but it drives me crazy. The left can't recognize that you simply can't have immigration at the level we are and do anything about climate change. It's impossible.
Well, yeah, also consider this. They bitch and moan all the time about how Americans, we use too much carbon, we use too much fuel, whatever. And they're like, oh, we have to reduce it, we have to stop it, and then they tell us, okay, white people, stop reproducing, stop, go ahead and die, just lay down and die, white people. And then at the same time, they decide, oh, well, let's go. Well, the population is collapsing. Let's import new people and then pretend that it's going to be okay, that they're not going to use carbon. It's insanity, of course. I mean, obviously, I fully understand that this is nothing more than the Kalergi plan of just population replacement, and that the goal fundamentally is to create a neo-feudalist system where you have a serf class of underlings, of low IQ underlings. I get it, I understand, but God damn it, it's fucking frustrating sometimes to watch.
It's part of what you mentioned earlier. Like, if they don't come to the U.S. or the West, these people don't get to have the extra kids. So what's happening is, and it's corporate America behind a lot of this, right? They're just driving these people into the West so they can come here, have more kids, and buy more shit. But in the meantime, of course, they come here, they wreck schools, and they increase their own carbon footprint. It's astounding how that is sort of openly disengaged, right, from the discussion. They know nobody could deny that if they act like carbon is the biggest thing in the world, the biggest problem in the world, and nobody can deny it's driven by migration. Yet.
Yeah. The plus side, though, and I really do, I have to get going, by the way, in the near future. I agreed to do something that I absolutely must do. But I again come back to the idea of the silver lining. For me, the silver lining is that we are going to suffer a collapse. We are going to suffer a grave situation that I'm unfortunately going to have to live through in terms of the opening volley. I think it's going to be multi-generational, but I'm going to see the very first flush of it, and I'm convinced I will not enjoy it at all. But on the other side of it, some time out, I honestly do think that the people who are going to be moving through it, they will be made of a heartier stuff. Just consider Generation Z. These people are born red-pilled because they have no choice but to acknowledge the reality of their situation. And I've been speaking to some Gen Z people, and they're in it to win it. So I do have hope for the future on a larger level. I just think that, yeah, I'm just not looking forward to the next couple of decades, really. So, you know.
Australia's population will reach 25 million within 3 weeks, about 9 years earlier than forecast by the Howard government's intergenerational report from 2002. So missing by 9 years is quite a lot, notes Steve Saylor, but what could possibly go wrong unless less rain falls on Australia, as in the millennium drought of 1997 to 2009. But that would be climate change, and everybody respectable knows that climate change is a hoax. So Australia's elites are perfectly justified in never giving a moment's thought to the interaction of mass immigration and climate change. What? I got climate change backwards? It is respectable to worry about worsening droughts in the future? So then everybody respectable worries about the interplay of mass immigration and climate change. No? Why not? It just never comes up. It's as if the two concepts never occur in the same head at the same time. How do they do that? You read Jared Diamond's 2005 book, Collapse, very carefully. You might note that Diamond is skeptical about whether Australia has enough water to support mass immigration. And contrary to their government and business leaders, 70% of Australians say they want less rather than more immigration.
And that change that they talk, that increase has been all probably a non-white increase in population there, right?
100%.
Wow.
Okay, maybe not 100%, but like 80% for sure.
Anyway, they're importing an Asian overclass, of course, and some Sudanese underclass.
Oh my God, dude! Freaking Sudanese! I don't know if you guys have been following that, but what's going on in isn't it Melbourne or something?
Yeah,
it's just absolutely crazy. They're going through situations that are approaching. Actually, they might be worse than what's going on in Paris. I mean, I've heard like crazy stories about how the Sudanese, they basically wander through neighborhoods completely unmolested, doing whatever they wish, you know, breaking and entering, you know, holding parties, just ravaging the landscape. It's just, what is it? The party ship in the oh God, what? Adams, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He had this one bit where there was a party that would basically go on raids, and it was a party that was contained in a spaceship, and they would just like, they were pirates, and they'd plunder everything for like guacamole and chips and crap and like daiquiris. And I basically think that the Sudanese in Melbourne are essentially like that, where they're really out. I mean, they're not intending to cause specific havoc or whatever, but they're just completely unchecked, and they're just having their own crazy party with no regard whatsoever to law and order at all. And in some cases, they revert to actual physical violence to take things from people. You hear these stories about how they run up to people and they just take their wallets and their phones or whatever. I mean, it's just horrible stuff. And it sounds like it's going to be approaching levels of violence that you would see like in Germany or in Paris or something like that. And it's just, oh my God. Yeah, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
I think
the Sudanese have like the worst reputation in Africa for what that's worth. So, I mean, bringing those folks directly into your country is testing things.
I think that I mean, I'm trying to put a positive spin because psychologically I need to have good things to think about now and again. But I think that one of the nice things is that this is becoming so obvious and so difficult to suppress and so difficult to ignore that even average people are like, wait a second, actually something is up. And I think that in the near-term future, I think that, you know, amongst the reasons why I think the communists are going to be a bit of an issue, in the near future, the conversation is going to shift into people openly discussing things like race realism. They're going to openly start discussing the problems with clashes of civilization. The unfortunate aspect of that is the natural consequence that the radical leftists will just arbitrarily declare everyone talking about it as a Nazi, and then everyone will be evil. Which overall is a good thing because that means that the left will be further marginalized. As with the walk away movement that's going on right now, there could be a further repellent effect with regards to leftist rhetoric and declaring everyone a Nazi for noticing reality. But yeah, the freaking Sudanese, they're a great example of people being forced to recognize the situation for what it is, in much the same way that in Europe, the Muslim thing, they're being forced to recognize the situation for what it is.
Yeah, I think more and more of those youngsters are getting red-pilled. The barista at Starbucks was reading Jordan Peterson. I don't know what that's worth. Then some other former liberal friend of mine sent me something recently, the latest outrage from MTV, some, you know, anti-white horrible thing that he saw. Yeah, I think it needs to happen faster, though. I mean, you know, those Sudanese, we need to be able to organize posses and just go round them up, you know.
Yeah, I don't think we're in that position just yet. I think I'm going to move out of Los Angeles because the 41,000 Somalis that are coming here, I talk about it all the time, but I'm very distressed about
it's
this.
A drop in the LA bucket, dude.
I know well, it sounds like a drop, but it's really not, because when you think about 41,000, that's actually a sizable township here. That's like I don't know how to describe it, but the specific area of Los Angeles that I live in is comprised of, I think, 30-ish thousand people or something, like my specific local area. So we're talking about, in effect, like a large village or a small township.
Yeah.
Now, just imagine those people being strung throughout downtown Los Angeles, which is basically where they're going to be going. They're going to be going throughout downtown mostly. Because the association is Maxine Waters. A lot of these people, they're going to be going into complexes that are owned by Maxine Waters' husband.
Really?
So that's where a lot of this is going to be going. And where is his property? Well, the majority of it happens to be in like central Los Angeles. So that's where they're going to end up. And since central Los Angeles, just by an amazing coincidence, happens to be populated largely by Mexicans, you're going to end up with another racial conflict between Mexicans and blacks. Only in this case, the American blacks, as where they were kind enough to defer to the Mexicans by moving out and moving into other sections of Los Angeles, we may end up with a much more harsh conflict because the Somalians, they don't give a flying fuck. They don't care.
No, this is pay-per-view shit. This is the pay-per-view matchup. The Mexicans, we all know about the dowdy Mexicans and their toughness. They actually ethnically cleanse blacks out of their neighborhoods. They're amazing.
Yeah.
But then again, Somalis are like the meanest people on the face of the earth. That's, of course, why we bring them to our countries.
yeah.
Man, I want to see it. I actually want to see it happen now. I'm sorry that you've got me excited about this.
Okay, well, okay. Now, just go ahead and consider what happened in the early 2000s. I think it was somewhere around 2002-ish, plus minus. There was the bumfights.com debacle. I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember that.
I remember bum fights.
I remember that too, and it was a terrible thing. But I think that we may end up seeing something not dissimilar to that once things actually start to ramp up, in much the same way that we see the live streaming of Antifa events. And if you look carefully, if you know where to look, you can find cell phone footage of indigenous Europeans going up against the Muslim marauders. I think we may end up seeing something a little bit like that with regards to events happening here in America. Okay, I'm sorry to sort of like come in and then bugger off, but I have some things that I agreed to do, so I have to take.
Okay, take care, man.
Thanks,
Thanks
Eddie.
for coming by.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Okay, take care.
All right.
He's great. So, Dennis, anything that you'd like to talk about? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up.
Well, yeah, one of my cats has gone into the brush behind the house, and I can't get him out of there. And he's been in there for like 3 days, and he seems to be uninjured. He's had some sort of psychological freak out. Do you know anything about luring cats out of the brush?
Can you get us some action video? Can you see like the cat?
Yeah, no, it's really weird. Yeah, so he's out there. I can't. It's this thick, thorny blackberry. You can't even move through it. You know.
Oh, right.
I actually tore a section of the fence out and stuck my head in there because I could hear him in there. And I'm like, it sounds gay, but this is how I call him, Key. And he can hear me, and then I hear him. The fucker is, because he's been missing 2 days.
Right.
He won't come out, and I'm thinking he's injured in there. And I even squeezed in there, and I got the clippers, and I cut. And I'm looking, and I can hear him, and he's like right there, but I can't see him. Anyway, I go back inside.
You cannot see him.
No, that was the first a couple of days ago. Then later, he's not, no food or water out there. It's really hot. There's no water anywhere. So I bring some food and water out, and I call him again. But I got to be careful because there's raccoons out there, and they're going to come and get the food and water, right? Anyway, so I lay back, I come back, and I can tell if the cat got it or the raccoons got it. He came and got food, so I know he at least can move around and shit. What's wrong with this cat? And then again at night, I hear him really loud. Like, okay, I'm gonna pull him out of there. And I go out there with my phone, flashlight, and I stick my head through I stick up my phone and I'm looking around, and there's cat is down by the creek. There's a creek that runs through the middle of it, and he's actually facing the creek, making this sound, really weird, creepy. And I'm right behind him. He knows where the house is, right? I don't know what this cat's. He's seeing ghosts or something, right? And I'm calling him, and I'm trying to get to him and get him out of there. Anyway, that's the last I saw of him. I put more food out. He appears to have got the food this morning. So right now I'm just trying to keep him alive, like bringing food out to him until I can get him close enough to grab him or whatever happens. Pretty bizarre.
So this cat would rather die in excruciating pain than live with you.
He's like he joins my exes, basically in fleeing the household. And yeah. Wouldn't be the first person to choose homelessness over living here. No, I don't know what's wrong with him, but the other cat's still plenty happy. So he's a refugee, and he's looking for
The cat is a metaphor for Western civilization.
Yes, I mean he's out there. I know he's stranded himself for no apparent reason, and I'm trying to lure him back into civilization.
Maybe you could find a Somali to figure it out for you.
The Somali who would do this work that I can't do, probably with their greater understanding of things generally. They've got to be wiser and more in touch with the animal world than I. So let's get them in here. Right.
Why do you have cats? Normally men don't have cats.
I know. I always stress that I ended up a single man with 2 cats by default, by accident, because they're my daughter's cats.
Okay.
She grew up, moved out, and I've got these two ancient cats. One's like 17 years old. The other one's like 12, and I'm basically waiting for them to croak, or they're waiting for me to croak. We're like three geldings here.
Well, maybe you could take the cat that is happy in your home and you could drop him right in the middle of this blackberry bramble, and that way you can have a final solution to your cat question.
Well, I need to diversify the bramble bushes, don't I? I mean, they're not diverse enough. I need to invite the raccoons into the house because my borders are not moral, and they will come in the house. They were trying to get in here last night. So the whole cat. Sorry.
Content Watcher says animals often go out alone to die.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But he's eating food, and I saw him, and he looks perfect. I expected to find him injured when like I said, I heard him, and he wouldn't come to me. I thought he's out there hurt or he's sick and he can't even move. But like I said, he's running around and stuff. So, and he's a weird cat. He's been psychologically weird.
Well, I mean, if he insists on being a jerk, then maybe you just need to say Kaddish and let him go.
Can I be honest? That impulse has gone through me where I thought, you fucker, I'm going to let you starve to death. That impulse is within me. You should know that.
Because you're subsidizing antisocial behavior.
Well, yeah, I got to take the Ayn Rand sort of libertarian perspective. I can't give charity. He's going to have to earn his way out there in the wild. That's what he's chosen to do, and I wouldn't want to. Yeah, it's pretty scary, though.
Keep us up to date. We'll be watching your Twitter.
Thanks. Yeah. Hopefully I'll rescue him by this time next week, and he'll be safe, and I can produce the cat.
And see if you can get some action video.
Yeah, I was going to. Yeah, I will. It's pretty cool. It was really creepy. Like I said, when I saw him down there by the creek, it was like Blair Witch because the light and everything and the way it looks in there. But
excellent.
All right.
Well, good luck on your cat catching.
Thanks, Luke.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.